A woman found a severely injured bear alone in the forest. Everyone said it had no chance, but she did the unthinkable. She rescued it with her own hands, facing fear, danger, and everyone's doubts. But the most amazing part wasn't the rescue. It was what happened next, an ending no one could have imagined, and it's going to move you deeply. Watch until the end, and if you believe in the power of compassion, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss real stories that defy the impossible. The Montana wilderness stretched before Sarah Ainsworth like an endless green canvas, untamed and breathtaking. At 42, she had chosen this remote existence deliberately, purchasing 50 acres of woodland property 3 years ago after her divorce. The isolation suited her. No prying eyes, no whispers, no sympathy she didn't want. Her log cabin sat nestled between towering pines, a mile from the nearest neighbor and 12 miles from the small town of Pinewood Ridge. That early April morning started like any other. Sarah woke at dawn, brewed her coffee, and set out to check the fence line along her property's eastern border. The spring thaw had begun, and with it came the seasonal repairs to her homestead. As she drove her old pickup down the dirt path that connected to the main road, the pink sunrise cast long shadows through the trees. She was nearly at the county road when she saw it, a dark, massive shape sprawled on the gravel shoulder. At first, she thought it might be debris or perhaps a fallen tree, but as she slowed her truck, her breath caught in her throat. It was a bear, an enormous grizzly, its brown fur matted with what could only be blood. Sarah's first instinct was to drive away. Grizzlies were dangerous under the best circumstances, and an injured one could be unpredictable. But something made her stop. The bear's chest heaved with labored breaths. Its eyes, half closed with pain, seemed to follow her movement as she cautiously exited her vehicle. "God Almighty," she whispered, keeping a safe distance. The animal was badly wounded. Deep gashes ran along its flank, and one of its paws was mangled. Sarah had lived long enough in bear country to recognize the marks of human cruelty, likely from illegal poachers who had failed to finish the job. Sarah reached for her phone, then remembered reception was spotty at best out here. The nearest Wildlife Service office was in Missoula, almost 3 hours away. By the time help arrived, if they even bothered with an injured predator, the bear would likely be gone. "I should just keep driving," she told herself, but couldn't take her eyes off the struggling creature. Despite its fearsome reputation, in that moment the bear looked helpless, its eyes reflecting a pain that felt strangely familiar. Sarah Ainsworth had not made many impulsive decisions in her life. She'd been the careful one, the planner, the woman who considered all angles before acting. That caution hadn't saved her 20-year marriage when Jack decided he preferred his younger secretary, nor had it protected her from the humiliation that followed in their small Connecticut community. But here, in Montana, she had promised herself a new beginning. Perhaps that's why she did what she did next. She backed her truck as close to the bear as she dared, then lowered the tailgate. With trembling hands, she retrieved a tarp from behind the seat. "This is insane," she muttered as she approached the massive animal. "Absolutely insane." The bear growled weakly as she drew near, but made no attempt to rise. Up close, Sarah could see its condition was even worse than she'd imagined. Whatever had happened, the animal wouldn't survive much longer without intervention. It took her nearly an hour of cautious maneuvering to slide the tarp beneath the bear and secure it enough to drag the massive body onto her truck bed. The entire time, her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, expecting at any moment the wounded predator might summon enough strength to swipe at her with its enormous paws. But it remained eerily docile, as if understanding her intent. By the time she arrived back at her cabin, sweat drenched her flannel shirt despite the cool spring air. She'd managed to construct a makeshift shelter in the storage shed behind her home, a space originally intended for garden equipment that now housed a 700-pound apex predator. Once inside, Sarah scrambled for supplies. Her experience was limited to basic first aid and what she'd learned from treating the occasional injured fox or deer that wandered onto her property. A grizzly bear was an entirely different challenge. She cleaned the wounds as best she could, while the bear drifted in and out of consciousness. The deepest gashes she stitched with dental floss, her hands shaking so badly she had to stop several times to steady herself. She created a poultice of honey and herbs for the less serious wounds, drawing on half-remembered wilderness survival books and common sense. "You're going to be okay," she found herself whispering, unsure if she was trying to convince the bear or herself. By nightfall, Sarah was exhausted but determined. She'd managed to coax the bear into drinking water mixed with dissolved aspirin and antibiotics from her own medicine cabinet. She'd called the local veterinarian, Dr. Frank Miller, only to be laughed at when she described her situation. "Lady, I treat cats and dogs, maybe the occasional horse. A wild grizzly? That's Wildlife Services territory, and even they'd likely put it down. You're playing with fire, bringing that thing onto your property." When she hung up, Sarah felt more alone than ever, but stubbornly refused to abandon the bear. "Fine, we'll do this ourselves," she said to the animal, who regarded her with pain-dulled eyes. Days passed in a blur of anxiety and small victories. The bear survived the first critical night, then the next. Sarah named him Theodore, after Theodore Roosevelt and his famous teddy bear, though she soon shortened it to Theo. It seemed ridiculous to name such a wild creature, but it made the enormous risk she was taking feel somehow more personal, more necessary. By the end of the first week, Theo was showing signs of improvement. He could lift his head when she entered the shed and had begun taking small amounts of the food she prepared, mostly fish, lean meat, and berries she gathered from the woods. His wounds, while still serious, were showing signs of healing without infection. Word had begun to spread through Pinewood Ridge about Sarah's unusual house guest. It started with Frank Miller mentioning the crazy bear lady to a few regulars at the local diner. By the time Sarah made her weekly trip into town for supplies, she felt the stares and heard the whispers. At the general store, Bill Cooper, who'd always been friendly, kept his distance. "You're playing a dangerous game, Sarah," he warned as he rang up her purchases. "Bears ain't pets. That thing recovers. What's to stop it from seeing you as its next meal?" "He's not a pet," Sarah replied evenly. "Once he's healed, he'll go back to the wild." Bill's wife, Martha, joined the conversation, her voice lowered but sharp. "Ryan Watson said his cousin's a game warden, says keeping a grizzly like that is illegal. You could get fined or worse." Sarah paid for her supplies and left without responding. She'd known there would be resistance, but the reality of it still stung. As she loaded her truck, she noticed several men watching from across the street, their expressions unreadable, but their posture hostile. One of them, a tall man in a hunting jacket with a neatly trimmed beard, approached her. "Heard you've got yourself a bear problem," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "Name's James Blackwood. I'm something of a local expert on problem predators." Sarah recognized the name. Blackwood was well known in the area, a guide who led hunting expeditions into the mountains. Some called him a conservationist. Others, particularly those who opposed trophy hunting, used less flattering terms. "It's not a problem," Sarah replied, closing her truck's tailgate with a decisive thud. "And I don't need any experts." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "With all due respect, ma'am, you don't know what you're dealing with. That bear recovers, gets its strength back. You'll have a killing machine on your hands. For your own safety, let me and my boys handle it." The threat beneath his offer was thinly veiled. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring air. I appreciate your concern, she said, meeting his gaze without flinching, but Theo is doing just fine under my care. Theo? Blackwood's laugh was harsh. You named it? Lady, that a thing isn't a pet dog. It's a wild animal that would rip your throat out without a second thought. Sarah got into her truck and started the engine, signaling an end to the conversation. But as she pulled away, she caught Blackwood's reflection in her rearview mirror, still watching, still calculating. She knew then that her challenges were just beginning. Healing Theo's physical wounds might prove to be the easiest part of this unexpected journey. Protecting him from those who saw him as nothing more than a trophy or a threat would require a strength she wasn't sure she possessed. As she drove back to her cabin, Sarah couldn't help wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But when she entered the shed and saw Theo lift his massive head in recognition, something solidified in her heart. Whatever came next, she would face it. Some connections defied explanation, and the bond forming between her and this wounded creature was one of them. 3 weeks after finding Theo, Sarah woke before dawn to check on him as had become her routine. The morning air carried the scent of pine and fresh dew as she made her way to the shed, a bucket of fresh water and a cooler of food in hand. The transformation in Theo surprised her daily. His wounds were healing remarkably well, the stitches holding despite his occasional restlessness. When she opened the shed door, Theo's eyes immediately found hers. No longer were they clouded with pain. Now they watched her with an intelligence that both unnerved and fascinated her. He remained cautious, but seemed to recognize her as a source of help rather than harm. "Good morning, big guy," she said softly, setting down the food and changing his water. "Looks like you had a good night." Sarah had expanded Theo's space, connecting the shed to a fenced area that allowed him limited movement without the risk of escape. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best she could manage while ensuring both his recovery and safety. As she watched him eat, Sarah reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Before the divorce, she'd been an art teacher in suburban Connecticut, her days structured around lesson plans and faculty meetings. Now, she was nurturing a grizzly bear back to health while an entire town questioned her sanity. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her friend Maggie Parker, the librarian in Pinewood Ridge, and one of the few locals who hadn't turned against her. "Sarah, I need to warn you." Maggie's voice was tight with concern. "There's talk around town. James Blackwood's been gathering support, saying you're harboring a dangerous animal that could threaten the community." Sarah's stomach knotted. "Theo's contained and recovering. He's not a threat to anyone. You know that, and I believe you. But folks here are scared of what they don't understand. Blackwood's planning something. I overheard him and Ryan Watson talking about inspecting your property, checking for violations." After thanking Maggie for the warning, Sarah spent the morning reinforcing Theo's enclosure. The more time she spent with him, the more she noticed his distinctive personality emerging. He had preferences, favoring salmon over other fish, enjoying the wild berries. She gathered more than store-bought fruit. He watched her work with curious eyes, occasionally making soft grunting sounds that she'd begun to interpret as different moods. Around noon, the sound of tires on gravel alerted her to visitors. Sarah wiped her hands on her jeans and walked around to the front of the cabin, her heart racing when she recognized James Blackwood's truck. Beside him sat Ryan Watson, who worked part-time for the county sheriff. A third vehicle pulled up, Frank Miller, the veterinarian. "Ms. Ainsworth," Blackwood called, his tone falsely pleasant. "Hope we're not interrupting." "What can I do for you gentlemen?" Sarah kept her voice steady despite her anxiety. Ryan stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "We've received complaints about a potentially dangerous wild animal being kept on your property without proper permits or containment." "I'm not keeping a wild animal," Sarah countered. I'm rehabilitating an injured bear that would have died otherwise. Once he's healed, he'll be released." "Be that as it may," Frank Miller interjected, "none of us are qualified to rehabilitate a grizzly. It's dangerous and, frankly, illegal without proper licensing." Sarah crossed her arms. "And what would you have done, Frank? Put him down? Pretend? You never saw him like you did when I called for help?" The tension thickened. Blackwood smiled, but there was something predatory about it. "We're just concerned citizens, Sarah. A bear that size with its natural fear of humans compromised by your intervention poses a serious risk to everyone in this valley." "I want to see this setup," Ryan said, his hand resting on his service belt. "Make sure it's secure." Sarah hesitated, knowing she had little choice. Refusing would only make things worse. "Fine. But keep your distance. He's still recovering and gets nervous around strangers." She led them to the enclosure, where Theo had retreated to the farthest corner of the shed, sensing the hostile presence. His eyes tracked the newcomers, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. "Jesus," Frank whispered, stepping back. "That's a full-grown male grizzly." Blackwood studied the bear with calculating eyes. "Must be 500–600 pounds, trophy-sized." The way he said trophy made Sarah's skin crawl. "He's not for hunting," she said firmly. "He's recovering from wounds that were likely inflicted by poachers." "Poachers?" Blackwood's voice hardened. "That's a serious accusation." "His injuries weren't natural," Sarah insisted. "Someone tried to kill him and failed." Ryan inspected the enclosure, circling it with a critical eye. "This setup isn't secure enough for an animal this dangerous. The fencing needs to be higher, reinforced. And you need proper paperwork, Sarah. Wildlife rehabilitation permits, health inspections." It was clear they were building a case against her. Before she could respond, a familiar truck pulled into her driveway. Relief flooded through Sarah as Daniel Reeves, the local wildlife biologist, emerged. She'd reached out to him a week ago, hoping for an ally with credentials the others would respect. "Sorry I'm late," Daniel said, nodding to the group. "Dr. Daniel Reeves, Montana Fish and Wildlife." He turned to Sarah. "You must be Ms. Ainsworth. I got your message about the injured grizzly." Blackwood's expression soured. "You knew about this?" "I received a call for professional guidance," Daniel replied evenly. "As a wildlife biologist specializing in large predators, I'm here to assess the situation." Daniel's presence changed the dynamic immediately. He examined Theo from a safe distance, noting the healing wounds and the bear's improved condition. "These injuries are consistent with poaching attempts," he confirmed, giving Sarah a validating glance. "And I have to say, Ms. Ainsworth has done remarkable work providing emergency care, but it's not legal," Ryan insisted. "She needs permits, proper facilities." "You're right," Daniel agreed, "which is why I've brought provisional rehabilitation paperwork with me. Given the emergency nature of the situation, we can file for retroactive approval." He turned to Sarah. "I'd like to help you finish the rehabilitation properly, if you're willing." The unexpected support left her momentarily speechless. Yes, of course." Blackwood was clearly displeased, but said nothing as Daniel outlined a plan that would allow Sarah to continue caring for Theo under his professional supervision. Ryan, looking relieved to have an official resolution, agreed to hold off on any citations pending the completed paperwork. As the men departed, Blackwood lingered. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "That bear is dangerous. It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt." "Why do you care so much about one bear?" Sarah challenged. His smile was cold. "I care about the safety of this community. And I care about respect for the natural order. That bear isn't meant to be your pet." "He's not my pet," Sarah replied. "He's a wild creature deserving of compassion." After they left, Daniel stayed behind to help Sarah improve Theo's enclosure. and complete the necessary documentation. As they worked, she learned more about him, a Montana native who'd spent years studying grizzly populations throughout the northern Rockies. Daniel had returned to work with local conservation efforts. "What you did was risky," he admitted as they reinforced the fencing, "but also brave. Most people would have walked away or called someone to put him down." "I couldn't leave him there," Sarah said simply, watching as Theo observed their work from the shade of the shed. "Something about him. I can't explain it." Daniel nodded. "Bears are incredibly intelligent animals. They form complex relationships, have excellent memories. The indigenous people of this region considered them spiritual beings for good reason." Over the next few days, Daniel visited regularly, bringing proper medical supplies and sharing his knowledge. Sarah welcomed his expertise and found herself enjoying his company, the first real human connection she'd made since moving to Montana. With Daniel's guidance, Theo's recovery accelerated. The bear grew stronger daily, moving with increasing confidence around his expanded enclosure. His relationship with Sarah deepened. He recognized her footsteps, responded to her voice, and accepted food directly from her hands. A level of trust, Daniel said, was extraordinary. "You've done something remarkable here," Daniel told her one evening as they watched Theo explore a new enrichment feature they'd built. "But you need to prepare yourself for the next phase." "Releasing him," Sarah said, a sudden heaviness in her chest. The inevitability of it had always been there, but as Theo recovered, the prospect of sending him back to the wild became increasingly difficult to imagine. "He'll need to be relocated far from human settlement," Daniel explained gently. "For his own safety, bears that grow comfortable around humans rarely survive long-term." Sarah nodded, knowing he was right but unable to dismiss the growing dread she felt at the thought of Theo's departure. She'd come to Montana seeking solitude, running from human connections that had brought her pain. Now she faced losing a connection that had healed something in her own wounded spirit. That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she heard a vehicle approaching on the access road, unusual for so late an hour. Peering out the window, she recognized Blackwood's truck moving slowly past her property, headlights off, before continuing down the road. The sight of it sent a chill through her. Despite Daniel's intervention, she sensed the threat hadn't passed. She checked Theo's enclosure one last time before bed, finding him alert and watching the darkness beyond the fence. He seemed to sense something too, his massive body tense with awareness. Sarah reached through the fence, her hand hovering near his head. After a moment's hesitation, Theo moved closer, allowing her fingers to brush his fur, the first voluntary physical contact he'd initiated. "We'll be okay," she whispered, unsure if she was reassuring herself or him. As she returned to her cabin, Sarah felt a growing certainty that whatever Blackwood was planning, she would need all her strength, and Theo's, to face what was coming. 2 months had passed since Sarah found Theo bleeding on the roadside. The calendar marked mid-June, and Montana's brief but glorious summer painted the landscape in vibrant greens and wildflower bursts. Theo had transformed from the barely breathing creature she'd rescued into a magnificent specimen of his species, his coat now glossy, his movements powerful and sure. With Daniel's help, Sarah had expanded Theo's enclosure to include a section of the wooded area behind her cabin, complete with a small artificial pond where the bear could cool off and practice fishing. The provisional rehabilitation permit hung framed in her kitchen, official validation of her efforts, though it hadn't silenced all opposition. On this particular morning, Sarah sat cross-legged on the ground near the enclosure, sketching Theo as he foraged among the bushes she'd planted. Her art, once abandoned in the aftermath of her divorce, had returned to her life along with her confidence. The bear's powerful form flowed from her pencil with an ease that surprised her. "You've got the proportions perfect," said Daniel, appearing beside her with 2 mugs of coffee. He handed her one and settled down on a nearby stump. His visits had become a regular part of Sarah's routine, evolving from professional oversight to something that felt increasingly personal. Sarah accepted the coffee with a smile. "He's a wonderful subject, never complains about how I draw him." Daniel laughed, then gestured to the sketchbook. "You're really talented. Did you study art?" "I taught it, actually. High school level, back in Connecticut." She took a sip of coffee. "Seems like another lifetime now. Why did you give it up?" Sarah watched Theo for a moment before answering. "After the divorce, I couldn't create anything. It was like all the color had drained out of my world." She flipped back through pages of her sketchbook, showing dozens of studies of Theo in various poses. He brought it back somehow. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a county sheriff's vehicle. Deputy Megan Collins stepped out, her expression serious but not hostile. Unlike some in town, Megan had maintained professional neutrality. "About Sarah's situation." "Morning, Sarah, Dr. Reeves," she greeted, adjusting her hat against the sun. "I'm here semi-officially. There's been a development I thought you should know about." Sarah's grip tightened on her mug. "What kind of development?" 3 hikers reported a missing dog near Thompson Ridge yesterday. Said they saw bear tracks in the area. Megan glanced toward Theo's enclosure. "James Blackwood is organizing a search party. I suspect it's more of a hunting party, though he's calling it a safety patrol." Daniel stood. "Thompson Ridge is 10 miles from here. There are dozens of black bears in these mountains, and at least 7 tagged grizzlies in this region. They can't possibly blame an incident on Theo." "They don't need facts," Sarah said bitterly. "They need a villain." She turned to Megan. "Is this legal? Can they just form a posse and hunt bears?" "With the right permits during season, yes. Outside that, no." Megan sighed. "But Blackwood's smart. He's calling it a public safety measure. After a dangerous animal encounter, he's got Ryan Watson's unofficial support and about 15 locals joining him." "When?" Daniel asked. "Tomorrow morning. They're gathering at sunrise at the Thompson Trailhead." Megan hesitated. "I'm telling you this because I believe in due process, not vigilante justice. Whatever you think of keeping that bear, you've followed the legal channels now. Blackwood's using fear to push his own agenda." After Megan left, Sarah paced the length of the enclosure, anxiety knotting her stomach. This isn't about some missing dog. Blackwood's been looking for an excuse. Daniel nodded grimly. "It's a pretext. If they start hunting in these mountains, any bear could become a target, including Theo if they come near your property. What can we do?" "I'll call my supervisor at Fish and Wildlife. We can demand to be part of any search effort, ensure they're following protocols." Daniel watched. Theo, who seemed to sense the tension, his massive head raised to observe them, "But it might be time to consider accelerating our relocation plan." The thought sent a pang through Sarah's chest. "He's not ready. We've barely begun the reacclimation training." Daniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, he's physically healed. The longer he stays, the more habituated to humans he becomes, and the harder reintroduction will be." She knew he was right, but couldn't shake the feeling that something would go terribly wrong if Theo left now. "Just give me a little more time," she pleaded, "at least until this situation with Blackwood is resolved." That afternoon, Sarah drove into town for supplies, bracing herself for the reception she'd receive. Pinewood Ridge's main street consisted of a handful of businesses strung along a 2-lane road. A general store, diner, hardware shop, small library, and the sheriff's office. News traveled fast in a town this size, and Sarah could feel the stares as she parked outside the general store. Inside, the conversation halted as she entered. Martha Cooper gave her a tight smile from behind the counter, but several customers avoided eye contact. Sarah gathered her items quickly, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her through the aisles. As she checked out, Martha leaned forward. You should know that Blackwood's been showing photos around town. Says they're pictures of livestock killed by a grizzly matching the description of your bear. Sarah froze. That's impossible. Theo has been secured on my property for months. I'm just telling you what he's claiming, Martha replied, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. My Bill doesn't believe it either, but some folks are scared. Be careful, Sarah. Outside the store, Sarah loaded her groceries into her truck, her mind racing. The fabricated evidence meant Blackwood was escalating his campaign against Theo and against her. As she closed the tailgate, she spotted James himself across the street, surrounded by a group of men outside the hunting supply store. He noticed her and smirked, saying something to his companions that made them laugh. Sarah climbed into her truck, determined to leave before any confrontation could occur. But as she started the engine, Blackwood crossed the street and approached. Her window. Miss Ainsworth, he said, his voice carrying a false pleasantness. Just the person I wanted to see. Sarah rolled down her window slightly. What do you want, James? I wanted to give you fair warning. After what happened at Thompson Ridge, we'll be conducting a safety sweep of the surrounding area. That includes the woods near your property. Deputy Collins told me about your sweep, Sarah replied coolly. She also mentioned it's based on pretty flimsy evidence. Blackwood's smile hardened. A missing pet and bear tracks aren't flimsy to the family that lost their dog, or to the ranchers who've lost calves over the past month. Theo hasn't left my property. Any losses aren't his doing. You're sure about that? Blackwood challenged. Bears can travel miles in a night. Your enclosure might not be as secure as you think. The insinuation chilled her. Was he suggesting Theo had escaped, or threatening that someone might set him free to create evidence against him? My bear is secure and accounted for, she stated firmly, and I have all the necessary permits for his rehabilitation. If you or your friends come onto my property without permission, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Blackwood leaned closer, dropping his friendly facade. You're out of your depth, city girl. That bear belongs in a zoo at best, or mounted on someone's wall at worst. It's not a pet, and you're not Snow White in some fairy tale. Is there a problem here? Daniel's voice cut through the tension. He approached from the direction of the diner, his expression concerned. Blackwood straightened, his smile returning. Dr. Reeves, just having a friendly chat with Ms. Ainsworth. About the upcoming safety patrol. Perhaps you'd like to join us. Your expertise would be valuable. I've already spoken with my department about it, Daniel replied. Any operation involving potential wildlife contact needs to follow fish and wildlife protocols, with trained personnel present. Of course, Blackwood agreed smoothly. We're all about following proper procedures. After Blackwood walked away, Daniel leaned against Sarah's truck. I came into town to meet with Sheriff Taylor. Thought I might find you here. And I'm glad you did, Sarah said, still shaken by the exchange. Blackwood showing fake photos around town claiming Theo has been killing livestock. Daniel frowned. That's a serious allegation if he's falsifying evidence. Martha said he has pictures of dead calves, claiming they match Theo's description. But that's impossible. Actually, Daniel said carefully, there have been livestock losses reported. I was going to tell you, after meeting with the sheriff, 2 calves from the Miller Ranch last week and another from the Peterson place before that. Sarah's heart sank. You don't think? No, Daniel assured her quickly. The timeline doesn't align with Theo's presence. Here, these predation patterns started before you found him, but Blackwood is using the incidents to build his case. That evening, Sarah couldn't shake her unease. She checked and rechecked Theo's enclosure, finding it secure but adding additional locks just to be certain. The bear watched her anxiously, picking up on her mood. It's okay, big guy, she murmured, though she didn't believe her own reassurance. She was preparing dinner when her phone rang. Maggie from the library, her voice tight with worry. Sarah, you need to be careful tonight. I just overheard Ryan Watson talking to some men at the diner. They mentioned checking your property after dark, seeing if that bear is really contained like you claim. After thanking Maggie, Sarah immediately called Daniel, who promised to come right over. While waiting, she loaded her father's old shotgun, not to use against people, but to fire warning shots if necessary. The thought of confronting armed men terrified her, but the thought of them harming Theo was worse. The rain started around sunset, a steady downpour that turned the access road to mud. Sarah positioned herself on the porch, shotgun beside her, watching the darkness beyond her property line. Around 10 o'clock, she spotted headlights approaching with their high beams off, two vehicles moving slowly along the access road. Her heart hammering, Sarah stood and picked up the shotgun, aiming it skyward. She fired once, the blast echoing across the property. The headlights immediately stopped, then reversed hastily, disappearing back down the road. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, his truck splattered with mud from the increasingly treacherous road. Sarah related what had happened, showing him the fresh tire tracks visible even in the rain. "You were right to be vigilant," he said, checking the perimeter of Theo's enclosure with her. "But firing that warning shot was risky. They could use it against you, claim you were threatening them." "I was protecting my property," Sarah countered. "And Theo." When they reached the rear of the enclosure, Daniel's flashlight beam caught something that made them both freeze. The lock on the back gate had been tampered with, though it remained secure. "They tried to open it," Sarah whispered, rage and fear building inside her. "They were going to let him out, weren't they? Create their evidence." Daniel examined the damaged lock. "It looks that way. We need to report this to Sheriff Taylor immediately." Inside the enclosure, Theo paced anxiously, agitated by the night's events. As Sarah approached to reassure him, the bear rushed to the fence, not with aggression, but in what seemed like a protective stance, his eyes fixed on the dark woods beyond. A low growl rumbled from his chest. "Something's out there," Daniel said, raising his flashlight toward the trees. Before they could investigate, the distant sound of engines started up again. Sarah gripped the fence, watching as Theo continued to stare into the darkness, his posture alert and defensive. "He's trying to protect us," she realized aloud. "All this time we've been protecting him, and now—" Daniel nodded slowly. "The relationship goes both ways. But Sarah, this changes things. Tonight proves Blackwood is willing to go to extreme lengths. We can't wait any longer." "What do you mean?" "Theo isn't safe here," Daniel said gently. "We need to move him to the sanctuary immediately, tomorrow before Blackwood and his men return." The rain poured down around them as Sarah absorbed the painful truth. She'd known this moment would come eventually, but facing it now under threat made it even harder to accept. She reached through the fence, and Theo moved closer, allowing her to touch his wet fur. "You're right," she finally conceded, her voice breaking. "He needs to be somewhere safe." As they made plans for the morning transfer, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Blackwood wouldn't give up so easily. The failed attempt tonight would only fuel his determination. The race to save Theo had entered its final, most dangerous phase, and Sarah knew that both she and the bear would need all their courage to face what lay ahead. Dawn broke with an urgency that matched Sarah's racing heartbeat. She and Daniel had spent most of the night preparing for Theo's transport, sleeping in brief shifts to maintain watch over the property. The specialized transport cage, a reinforced metal container large enough for the bear, sat loaded on a trailer attached to Daniel's truck, ready for the journey. "The sanctuary is about 6 hours north," Daniel explained as they shared a hurried breakfast. "It's located in a protected wilderness area near the Canadian border. Over 20,000 acres of natural habitat, completely off-limits to hunters." Sarah nodded, pushing food around her plate without eating. "And they're expecting him?" "Yes. I spoke with the director last night. They have a transition enclosure ready. Daniel studied her face with concern. Sarah, this is the best possible outcome for him. He'll have space, protection, and eventually, freedom. I know, she said, softly. I just didn't think it would happen this way, rushed in the middle of a storm of threats. Outside, the rain had stopped, but dark clouds still hung low over the mountains. The forest dripped with moisture, creating a hushed, expectant atmosphere. Sarah approached Theo's enclosure for what might be their final morning routine. The bear came to the fence immediately, his brown eyes meeting hers with what seemed like understanding. "Today's the day, big guy," she told him, her voice catching. "You're going somewhere better." Sedating a 700-pound grizzly required careful planning. Daniel prepared the injection while Sarah coaxed Theo to the feeding station they'd built along one side of the enclosure. The bear had grown accustomed to taking medication mixed with honey, but the sedative required direct injection. With Sarah distracting him with fresh berries, Daniel managed to administer the shot through a specially designed port in the fence. Within 15 minutes, Theo's movements slowed, his massive body gradually lowering to the ground as the sedative took effect. "Perfect dose," Daniel confirmed, checking the bear's breathing. "He'll be out for about 3 hours, just enough time to load him and get a good head start." They worked quickly, using a makeshift stretcher to move the unconscious bear into the transport cage. Even sedated, Theo's immense weight made the task challenging. Once secured, Sarah took a moment to stroke his fur through the bars of the cage. "We need to leave now," Daniel urged gently. "If Blackwood's group is starting their patrol at sunrise, we want to be well away from here before they mobilize." Sarah nodded, gathering her essentials, a small bag of clothes, her sketchbook, and the provisional wildlife permit. Everything else could stay. Her priority was getting Theo safely to the sanctuary. As they prepared to depart, Maggie's car came bouncing up the access road, skidding slightly on the mud. She jumped out, her expression anxious. "Thank God you're still here," she gasped. "Blackwood's gathered at least 20 men. They're armed and heading this way, not to Thompson Ridge like they said. They're coming directly here." Daniel checked his watch. "How long do we have?" 30 minutes, maybe less," Maggie replied. "Ryan told them he received an anonymous tip that the bear had escaped. It's a pretext to search your property." Sarah's blood ran cold. "They're going to kill him. That's been Blackwood's plan all along." "Not if we get moving now," Daniel said firmly. "The main road will take us right past them." "Is there another way out?" Sarah thought quickly. "There's an old logging road that connects to the county line. It's rough terrain, but it should be passable with your truck." Maggie hugged Sarah tightly. "I'll stay here, try to slow them down if they arrive before you're clear." "No," Sarah insisted. "That's too dangerous. Come with us." But Maggie shook her head. "Someone needs to be here to document what they do. I've already called a friend at the regional newspaper. If they trespass or damage your property, we'll have evidence." With no time to argue further, Sarah climbed into Daniel's truck. The vehicle lurched forward, the trailer with Theo's cage swaying behind them as they took the narrow path that led to the old logging road. The route was treacherous, washed out in places from the recent rain, with fallen branches and deep ruts that threatened to trap them. "This road hasn't been maintained in years," Sarah observed anxiously as Daniel navigated a particularly steep section. "It'll hold," he assured her, though his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. 15 more minutes, and we'll connect with the Northern County Highway. They won't think to look for us that way." They had almost reached the county line when Sarah spotted headlights in the side mirror, vehicles moving rapidly along the same logging road they'd taken. "They found us," she whispered. "How did they know about this route?" Daniel accelerated, but the heavy trailer limited their speed on the uneven terrain. Someone must have told them. How many locals knew about this old road? Anyone who's lived here long enough, Sarah admitted. The pursuing vehicles were gaining ground. Through the rear window, Sarah could make out at least 3 trucks, their high beams cutting through the morning mist. The lead vehicle was unmistakably Blackwood's distinctive black pickup. "We're not going to outrun them," Daniel said grimly. "Not on this road." They came to a fork in the path. Without hesitation, Daniel took the left branch, which appeared less traveled. The truck's wheels spun in the mud before finding traction. Behind them, their pursuers momentarily slowed, apparently debating which fork to take. "That might buy us a few minutes," Daniel said, "but we need a better plan than just running." Sarah pulled out her phone. No signal, of course, she thought, rapidly. "There's an old fire watch tower about 2 miles up this road. It's been abandoned for years, but it might give us some high ground." Daniel nodded and pushed the truck harder. The watchtower appeared ahead, a weathered wooden structure, rising above the tree line on a rocky outcrop. They pulled into the clearing beneath it, just as the sound of engines grew louder behind them. "We can't move, Theo," Daniel said, assessing the situation. "That cage is too heavy to carry up there." "Then we make our stand here," Sarah decided, a calm certainty replacing her fear. She reached for her phone again, relieved to see a single bar of reception. "I'm calling Sheriff Taylor directly. He needs to know what's happening." While Sarah made the call, Daniel checked on Theo. The bear was beginning to stir, the sedative wearing off earlier than expected due to the stress of transport. "He's waking up," Daniel warned as he rejoined Sarah. The sheriff hadn't answered, but Sarah had left an urgent message explaining their situation. She pocketed her phone as the first of the pursuing vehicles entered the clearing. Blackwood's truck stopped 30 yards away, and he stepped out, rifle in hand. 5 other men emerged from the vehicles behind him. "That's far enough," Daniel called, positioning himself between them and the trailer. Blackwood's smile was cold. "Dr. Reeves, Miss Ainsworth, going somewhere with your little pet?" "We're transporting a rehabilitated wildlife specimen to a sanctuary, with full authorization from Montana Fish and Wildlife," Daniel replied officially. "Interfering with this transport is a federal offense." "Is that right?" Blackwood took another step forward. "Because what I heard was that dangerous predator escaped and was seen heading north. We're just concerned citizens responding to a public safety threat." "That's a lie, and you know it," Sarah said, stepping forward. "Theo has been secured the entire time. Your men tried to sabotage his enclosure last night to create your evidence." Ryan Watson emerged from one of the other vehicles, looking uncomfortable. "James, maybe we should wait if they have proper authorization." "This isn't about authorization," Blackwood cut him off. "It's about protecting our community from a threat. That bear killed livestock. It'll kill pets, and eventually, it'll kill a person." "You fabricated those livestock deaths," Sarah accused. Daniel confirmed the timeline doesn't match. The standoff intensified as more of Blackwood's followers exited their vehicles. Some held rifles, others carried hunting bows. The odds were overwhelmingly against Sarah and Daniel. A low rumble from the trailer drew everyone's attention. Theo was awake, and though still groggy, he was becoming aware of his surroundings. When he let out a deep growl, several of the men raised their weapons. "See?" Blackwood pointed. "Dangerous animal. Put it down now before someone gets hurt." "Nobody's shooting anyone or anything," came a new voice from the edge of the clearing. Sheriff Taylor emerged from the trees, accompanied by Deputy Collins and 2 state troopers. "Lower those weapons, now." Relief flooded through Sarah as the sheriff approached, his expression stern. "Got your message," he told her. "Megan was already filling me in on the situation. Seems we have a case of harassment, trespassing, and now unlawful pursuit." Blackwood's confidence faltered slightly, but he rallied. "Sheriff, we received reports of an escaped bear. We're within our rights to protect—" "Save it, James," Taylor interrupted. "Ryan already came clean about the false report you pressured him to file." He turned to the gathered men. "Anyone who doesn't want to face charges should head home." Now, this operation is over. Most of the group dispersed quickly, eager to distance themselves from potential legal trouble. Only Blackwood and two others remained, their expressions defiant. "This isn't over," Blackwood warned Sarah. "That bear doesn't belong here." "You're right," she agreed calmly. "He belongs somewhere safe from people like you. And that's exactly where we're taking him." Under the sheriff's supervision, Sarah and Daniel prepared to continue their journey. Theo was fully awake now, watching the proceedings from his cage with alert eyes. When Sarah approached, he moved toward her, pressing his massive head against the bars. "It's okay," she told him softly. "We're almost there." The rest of the journey proceeded without incident. Sheriff Taylor provided an escort to the county line, and by mid-afternoon, they reached the Northern Wildlife Sanctuary. The facility was everything Daniel had described: a vast, protected wilderness with specialized transition areas for animals requiring rehabilitation. The sanctuary director, Emma Wilson, greeted them warmly. "We've been following Theo's case with interest," she explained as they unloaded the transport cage. "It's not often we see this level of successful private rehabilitation with a grizzly." Sarah watched as sanctuary staff carefully moved Theo to his new, temporary enclosure, a spacious, naturalistic habitat where he would stay until ready for full release. "How long will he be here before you set him free?" she asked. "That depends on him," Emma replied. "We'll monitor his behavior, assess his hunting skills, make sure he maintains a healthy fear of humans. Could be weeks, could be months." As the bear explored his new surroundings, Sarah felt both profound sadness and relief. "Will I be able to visit him?" Emma's expression was gentle but firm. "It's better if you don't. The goal is to minimize human contact, help him return to true wild behavior, but I promise we'll send updates and photos." Sarah nodded, understanding but heartbroken. She approached the enclosure one last time. Theo came to the edge, his brown eyes finding hers as they had that first morning by the roadside. "This is goodbye, big guy," she whispered. "Be free, be safe." Whether it was imagination or reality, Sarah would later swear that Theo understood, that in that final shared gaze was a recognition of all they'd been through together and a farewell that transcended the boundaries between their species. The drive back to Pinewood Ridge was quiet, both Sarah and Daniel lost in their thoughts. When they reached her cabin, she was relieved to find it undisturbed. Maggie had left a note explaining that the sheriff had arrived shortly after they'd departed, preventing Blackwood's group from trespassing. "What will you do now?" Daniel asked, as they sat on her porch that evening, watching the sunset paint. "The mountains." Sarah considered the question. "I'm not leaving, if that's what you're asking. This is my home now." She looked toward the empty enclosure behind the cabin. "Though it's going to be strange without Theo, the community will come around," Daniel assured her. "What you did, it took courage. People respect that, even if they didn't understand at first." In the weeks that followed, Sarah gradually reintegrated into the Pinewood Ridge community. The controversy surrounding Theo faded as newer gossip took precedence. James Blackwood faced charges for filing false reports and inciting harassment, which dampened his influence considerably. True to her word, Emma sent regular updates about Theo's progress. The photos showed him growing stronger, more confident in his natural environment. The sanctuary staff nicknamed him the Gentleman for his unusually calm demeanor around their observation points. 4 months after leaving Theo at the sanctuary, Sarah received a special message from Emma. Theo had been successfully released into the deep wilderness of the protected territory. The tracking collar they'd fitted him with showed healthy movement patterns, successful hunting, and proper avoidance of human areas. "He's truly wild again," Emma wrote. "This is what success looks like in wildlife rehabilitation." Sarah celebrated the news by hiking to her favorite overlook point in the mountains above her property. From there, she could see miles of wilderness stretching toward the northern horizon. Somewhere in that vast expanse, Theo was living the life he was meant to live. As promised, she continued to receive occasional updates on Theo's movements. From his tracking collar, he roamed widely, but seemed to establish a territory in the northern region of the sanctuary, far from human settlement, but occasionally visible to the research teams who monitored the area's wildlife. A year passed. Sarah's life found new purpose. She began teaching art at the local school and working part-time with Daniel on wildlife education programs. Their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper, a partnership built on shared values and mutual respect. Then, on the anniversary of Theo's release, Emma called with unexpected news. "The tracking data shows something strange," she explained. "For the past week, Theo has been moving steadily south toward the sanctuary's border. It's unusual behavior for a bear that's established territory." Sarah felt a flutter of concern. Is he heading toward populated areas? No, that's the curious part. He's avoiding towns and ranches completely, but he's definitely on the move with purpose. 3 days later, Sarah was sketching on her porch when Daniel's truck came racing up the drive. He jumped out, his expression a mix of disbelief and excitement. "You need to see this," he said, leading her toward the wooded area behind her property line. There, at the edge of the forest, where her land met the wilderness, stood a familiar silhouette, massive, brown, unmistakable. Theo had somehow traveled over 100 miles, navigating through mountainous terrain, avoiding human settlements, to return to the place where his journey began. He stood at a safe distance, observing them with those intelligent eyes Sarah had never forgotten. He made no move to approach closer, maintaining the proper boundary between wild and tame. But he was there, as if to show her that some connections transcend understanding. "How is this possible?" Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Bears don't do this." Daniel shook his head in wonder. This one did, he remembered. For 3 days, Theo remained in the vicinity, always keeping a respectful distance but visible at dawn and dusk. Sarah never approached him, understanding that his wildness was a gift that must be preserved. On the morning of the 4th day, he was gone, returned to his wilderness home, having delivered his silent message. That evening, Sarah sat with Daniel on her porch, a new sketchbook open on her lap, filled with fresh drawings of Theo's unexpected visit. "You know," Daniel said thoughtfully, "indigenous cultures around the world believe that animals choose us, not the other way around. That certain creatures come into our lives as guides or protectors when we need them most." Sarah considered this as she looked out at the mountains bathed in twilight. "I came here to hide from connection, to escape the pain of human relationships. And then I found him, or he found me, and reminded me that connecting with others, even when it hurts, is what makes life worth living." In the distance, a lone wolf howled, its call echoing across the valley. From somewhere much further away, perhaps only in Sarah's imagination, came the answering grumble of a bear, wild, free, but never forgotten. Dear listeners, we hope that Sarah and Theo's extraordinary journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. The bonds we form in life, whether with people or with the wild creatures that share our world, can transform us in ways we never imagined possible. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life's unexpected connections. For more heartwarming tales of redemption and courage, click on the playlist to your left. And we'd love to hear about your own special encounters with the natural world. Please share them in the comments below. Until our next story, remember that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers.